Hello and welcome to this video on using utility nodes within KeyShot. By the end of this demonstration, I would have gone through the majority of the utility nodes that are available within KeyShot to reproduce the texture and logo effects that you can see on this ceramic mug. So the use of the utility nodes is to allow you to manipulate textures into a look that you're after, whether or not it is adding like a gradient effect on there, combining and blending two textures together, or even just isolating certain colors. So before I get going, what I'm going to do is open up the material graph so you can see what the final image is going to look like. So as you can see here, there are several utility nodes that are being used to manipulate different textures to create this final look. So let's go through them all. Firstly, I'm just going to jump to my second multi-material, which is my starting point, and just slightly kind of move that camera positioning to a different save camera so we can see the mug on the left-hand side. Right, so the first part I'm going to do is start to manipulate the bump element. So at the moment, the bump of this material is being controlled by a metal texture. Now it might be that I want to have multiple textures that control this bump. Now the default is that only one texture can control the bump of any material. So what we have is the bump add utility node. So if I right click on the connection, under utilities, there is only the one option of the bump add. And that's because this is the only utility node that can actually be inputted into the bump of a material. So with that in place, I can then start to add in what I want that second texture to be. Now in the material graph, if I click on key, it will bring up as a quick node option, and I can type node texture or any node I want into that search bar, and it will filter it out. So here I can select the noise texture, and it'll bring that node into my material graph. I can then connect that to the bump 2, and I should then see I've got two bumps now on that model. Now making sure I've double clicked on that bump add node to see the parameters, I can then start to manipulate what these values are. So the first one is the ratio. So this is the blend between the two textures. Now the default is 0.5, which means there is a 50-50 blend between those two textures applied. If I go closer to 0, the main bias is towards texture 1. So in this case, the metal texture is shown stronger. If I go closer to 1, the bias is now onto bump 2, so in this case the noise texture, and we can see that one a bit more prominent. For this one, I want a slight bias towards the metal texture itself, and only like a subtle noise texture coming through. You then have the weights. Now the weight acts as a multiplier to whatever the bump height value is that is within those textures. So for example, in this noise texture, it's currently set to 0.1, and the weight 2 is 1 times that value, so it's a true value. I could, for example, increase to 3 to increase that bump noise texture, and as you can see therefore it's a little bit stronger. Now all of these parameters can also be driven by textures. So here, for example, I could right click and add in a color gradient texture. Now if I select that node and hit C on my keyboard, it gives me a color preview, and I can then see whereabouts this particular texture is, which can make it easier to manipulate. Okay, so I can reposition that where I want it to be. And also what I'm going to do for this one is just bring that white value down a little bit more, so there's more of a brighter section and a bit of a smaller blend between the white to black. If I hit let's see on my keyboard again, it will then disable that color preview so I can see my other textures. And I'm going to attach that color gradient to weight 1. So what that's doing is it's affecting the bump height of that metal texture. So anywhere there was the black value, that is equal to 0. So therefore the bump height is 0, or times 0 I should say. And anywhere it was white, it is 1. So therefore the weight is multiplier is set to 1, so it's 1 times whatever value of bump height it was. You've then got that gradient between the grey section. Now it might be we actually want it the way around. We want to have the metal texture roughness at the base of the mug, and just the noise at the top to kind of make it look like that this scratching effect has worn away over time. So I could just invert the graph here and just change the black and white colorings. But if I wanted any more control over how that gradient works, I've got another utility node that I can use, which is the color to number option. Okay, so with your color to number option, what it does is it takes the color values and assigns them to numerical values, and it allows you to limit and control how the texture affects the material. So if I hit the Let's See on my keyboard with that color to number selected, I can see the changes it makes. So my input from and to, it represents the values from the texture. Okay, so 0 is black or any color from that texture, and 1 is white. Okay. So I said I can start to kind of like manipulate these. So let's say for the darker sections, I want to kind of increase that out a bit. Also, it's just mainly light. I might want to add that value up a little bit more. So that gradient element is gone, and it's now just kind of the strength of the white and the black. You've then got your output from, and this represents the number from the color to number into the material. So at the moment, my input from value is roughly 0.9 to 1, but that needs to be the full scale of 0 to 1 for the output. Okay. Now with these ones, I can change it. The lower the number, so 0 is for darker pixels and 1 is for lighter pixels. And if I wanted to invert it, so it's actually the other way around, so the dark section was where the white element of the original texture is, and the white is at the bottom. What I can do is I can invert the numbers. So the input to value is lower than the input from. So you can see here, now the black section is at the top. I can then manipulate the output from, so if I wanted it brilliant white, see on my keyboard so you can see that, so it is a strong bump texture at the bottom, I can. Or I could also reduce it down, so it's reducing the value of that multiplier in those areas to give it more of a subtle look. It's only a slight scratching within there. Now, it may be that you kind of get roughly the look that you want, but you still want a bit more strength within that texture map. That is when you can go back to the original texture map and maybe play around with what the values are in there to increase it a little bit more. So with this kind of bump texture on it, the kind of look I've gone for is making out that the mug was originally had this metal texture over the entirety of it, and it's worn away around the top section. Even though the bump element of it might have worn away, the roughness that it gives you might not have. That might still be there because it's probably ingrained into the mug itself. So to get that effect, what you want to do is apply this texture map to the roughness of the paint. Now originally what it is doing is it's looking at the colours within this texture map, so the dark greys and the occasional bit of white, and applying those straight away as numbers into the roughness, hence why the whole thing has gone quite matte and we seem to have lost a lot of the detailing. So this is where that colour to number can come into effect again. So if I apply that within there and double click on the values, I can start to manipulate these, and it might just be a case of just going to reduce that output from, so for it's making that mug more glossy. So you can see as I'm dragging that down, we can see I'm starting to get some of that shine back, but it's not pure gloss. So when I'm slightly happy with the look, I can then finish dragging those parameters around. Okay. So now I'm going to kind of focus on some of these labels that I've created down here. Now these labels are already in position, but you can see there's a dashed line, and that's just because they're disabled from view. So for this first one, I'm just going to right click on the connector and enable it to bring that label into play. Now this is currently a metal label with the KeyShot logo in place, but I may not want to have all of these colours within there. I may only want a small section of it, or one of the coloured sections of it, I should say. So for this one, what I can do is I can use a colour key mask. Now the colour key mask will isolate a specific colour. So let's say I change this to white. It's just going to look for the white areas of the label and isolate them. You've then got your tolerance and your fuzziness value. So I'm just going to remove the fuzziness to begin with so we can focus on the tolerance. The tolerance is going to look at the specific color and then what gradient of color it can also allow. So the lower the number, the more perfect white I'm looking for. Now in this case, there is no brilliant white, so I want to increase that tolerance value until I can start to see more of the label that I'm after. But then also you've got your fuzziness, so don't just go straight for your tolerance at the top until you can see everything that you want. You may want to still have some blending in there from the other colors or the other lighter areas of that label. So this is where the fuzziness comes into play, is it kind of acts a bit more like an opacity map, and as you drag it up, more of the lighter sections will start to appear. It acts a bit like as a fall off as well from within there. So there, as you can see, I've kind of just isolated the white elements, the white and lighter elements of that logo. So that's all that's been shown. So different options I could do here. I could then use different utility nodes to manipulate what that original color is, or I could just leave it as is as an isolation. So what I'm actually going to do this one is use another new-ish feature to KeyShot, which is a 3D paint, because I've kind of got a worn-out look already at the top. I want to apply that to this particular label on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click in the background, and from Textures, find my 3D paint option. I'm going to then connect the color key mask to the color of the 3D paint, and then the 3D paint to the color of the metal, so it's acting in between. I'm going to double click on the 3D paint node to see kind of its parameters. I'm just going to scroll to the bottom and change that layer background to black. Okay, so it kind of acts as a bit more transparent. I still want to see the label coming through, so I don't want to play around with the transparency, otherwise I won't see that label. But having it as black, which is the same as the base color, means that it will still look like the same mug that I've got. I'm also going to start playing around with kind of like the opacity, so how quick the paint comes out, as well as the flow. So the flow will see how consistent the paint comes out. Perhaps I may want to also just increase the size of it, and just so the paintbrush is bigger. Now at the moment, the shape of the brush is just going to be a circle. If I open up the KeyShot library, within here, I can see there are different brush shapes that I can have into play. So for this one, I might, as an example, want one of these fingerprint options. So I'm just going to drag and drop it onto that checkered box to say that is what the brush shape is going to be. Okay, so here I'm just going to hide that library. When I've got all my settings in place, I can then hit paint. So this will allow me to now paint over my model and start to expose that label. So down the left mouse button, I can just drag that paintbrush over the model. If I need to rotate my camera in any way, just hold down the Alt key. It will rotate it round so I can see more of the mug from a different angle, just in case there's other areas that I just want to paint over to bring that label through. When you're happy with your look, you can then click Done. And then there's that label kind of coming through, looking like it's also slightly worn out a bit. Right, so the next label I'm going to look at is this black text label. So I'm just going to enable that one. Now, because it is obviously a black mug, I can't really see too much of this black text. So one of the options, as well as the color's number, is I do also have a color invert. So this will take kind of any black parts and convert them to white and vice versa. It's one of the simplest utility nodes, as there aren't any other parameters that go with it. What you can also do with the color invert is I could then input this into a color adjust. Now with the color adjust, what it does is it can manipulate the coloring of that texture map. Now if I just put the black texture into it, none of these parameters make any changes because it can't affect the black coloring, but now it is more white. You'll start to see that if I, for example, change the colorize option to, let's say, this cyan color I've got here, it has then updated that label to have that cyan as a driving color. It might be that I want to have a bump apply to this material as well. So again, I'm just going to open that library up again, and then within here, go to my my labels section, and I'm going to bring in this KeyShot wordmark bump texture. I'm going to apply that to the bump of the metal label. I'm just going to hide my library again so we can see everything. Now with that bump texture, I'm just going to select the node and hit C on my keyboard so you can see where it is. So you can see at the moment it's kind of wrapping around the middle. It's probably got a box mapping, a box texture map applied to it, hence why it's doing that. But if I hit C on my keyboard again, I can't see that bump on the mug. And that's because the label itself is being driven just purely by this KeyShot word down here, and the bump is nowhere near it. Now, if I wanted them to be lined up, I could go through and figure out the exact positioning of this word mark here, and then type in the same values. But we also have our utility mapping 2D node. So if I bring that in, I can then attach that to both of those textures. Okay, so it's kind of the input for both of those. Now for any values within this mapping 2D to actually control these two textures, I need to go into them textures and change the mapping type to node. So you can see I've just done that first one, so we can see that the cyan label has increased in size. Now if I do it for the bump, you should now see there's that bump element which has gone in line with it. Now the reason why it's gone big is just due to the parameters that were within this mapping 2D. So here I can start to manipulate this. So I want it as a planar mapping type on the part. I'm just going to reduce the width and height so it's a bit smaller, and I'm going to start positioning it. So when I click to move texture, my position is highlighted by default and in blue, so I can simply click roughly where I want it on the mug. If you want to be then more accurate, just deselect that position, translate, then becomes available and ticked, and I can then use the arrows if I wanted to further manipulate where that label was to get it in the desired position. Okay. So now if I ever want to move either of those, I just have to do it through that mapping 2D. But at least you know they'll be moved together. I don't have to kind of individually, by eye, make sure they're lined up. But then the final label I've got here, which I'm going to enable, is a cyan paint color with a marble material attached to the opacity. So at the moment, you can see it is the veins that have got the opacity attached to them, so we can see through. But like before, I said it might be that I actually want it the other way around. So here I can select that connection point, and in the utilities, go to the color invert, so that it's now cyan veins I see, and the majority of the mug is back to that black material. Now I might want it that the handle doesn't have these veins on. Now in this model, the whole thing is one solid part, so I can't unlink materials in any case. There's also quite a nice rounded effect on it, so trying to split this surface out could prove quite laborious. So that's why in the material graph, we have the option of using the color composite. So in between my color invert and the paint, that connection, I'm going to right click and add in a color composite node. So what the color composite node allows you to do is combine multiple textures using different blend and alpha options. It's commonly used to create kind of opacity maps from multiple textures, and it can also add gradients. So the first kind of what I'm going to show you is the kind of the opacity map kind of element to it. So what I'm going to do is add in a color gradient texture. First of all, I'm just going to hit C on my keyboard so I can see what it's doing, and then manipulate whereabouts I want it to be. Now I don't want there to be a blend. I want to go straight from white to black in this case. I'm going to then move the texture around and manipulate the positioning of it so that just the handle kind of has that black colouring on it, and then the main body of the mug is white. So when I'm happy position, hit the green tick and then C on my keyboard to disable the preview. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to attach this to the source alpha. So the alpha affects the transparency of that source texture. So with the black to white values, the black is going to be completely transparent compared to the white section. So that is why the handle has now gone back to the original colouring of the paint material, which is that cyan. So as well as kind of working as like an opacity option, you can blend things together. So we had it on our final mug where the veins were only at the top and blended down on the bottom, and the handle was black. So first, this one I'm going to do is go back to my original material within there and just zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to select the additional nodes. So it's these two color gradients, the color to number, and this color composite. I'm going to hit Control C on my keyboard to copy them, and then go back to my new material and just paste those in. Okay, so you can copy and paste nodes between different materials, which can make things a bit quicker. So within here, I can then attach this color composite to the background. Now, the only thing that we've seen change is that the handle has gone black. The reason why we've not seen anything else change is because the color composite acting as a layering. So the source is the top layer and the background is the bottom layer. Now, what we've got going on in here, just so we can see, is we've got a color gradient from dark to light, which has then been manipulated to kind of be switched, and a bit more control between the blending elements using a color to number. Its alpha is then the same as what we've done for the previous alpha, where it's blacked out the handle. Now for this one at the moment, as I said, they're just layered on top of each other, but for us to be able to blend these two together, blend the source and the background together, I need to change this blend mode from normal to, in this case, multiply. So this then looks at the darker areas and blends those elements together of those textures, and we can then start to see those veins coming through. If I go to my color to number section, I could start to kind of like manipulate what I want the values to be if I want those veins to be a little bit stronger in coloring along the top. And that is how you can use the utility nodes to kind of manipulate different textures within your models and create different effects. Thank you very much for listening.